Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Thanks for joining us. Iowa News and Views is a bona fide news interview program. Just ask TCI. We recently talked with them about it and they agree. Iowa News and Views is seen in about 375,000 households statewide, and we hope you will tell your friends about us and remember to set your VCR. We're on at the same time each week, at the time you're seeing us. Thanks for being with us. I'd like to start the program this evening with a little news item. You know, we've got some Republican and Democratic primaries coming up, and I just want to say, has anybody seen Jim Ross Lightfoot? The Republicans have had a series of debates for Republican governor with David Oman and Paul Pate, and Mr. Lightfoot's only attended a handful of more than about a dozen, and he's missing, I think. But, you know, with a record like his, in terms of some of his votes when he was in Congress, he has good reason to lay low. He's the guy that voted against the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and Americans with Disabilities Acts, to name just a few things. We'd love to have him on the show, so if anybody's out there seen him, give us a call and we'll see if we could have him on as a guest. That's the news. Don't forget to vote in that June 2nd primary coming up. Our guests tonight are here to talk about the perfect tax, with a question mark, the local option sales tax. And we've got a couple proposals on the table, one in Lynn County and Cedar Rapids, another one in Johnson County and Iowa City, where voters will soon go to the polls to tell us whether they want those taxes implemented. Our guests are Gary Streit. He's the co-chair of Greater Opportunities for Cedar Rapids. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here, Joe.
And Jeff Cox from Iowa City. Jeff is a history professor at the University of Iowa. Thanks, Jeff, for being here. Gary, why don't you start it off and give us some background on what the proposal is in Cedar Rapids and Lynn County.
On June 23rd, the issue comes to a vote, and the ballot varies all over Lynn County, but in Cedar Rapids, which is where our group is working, the project's supposed to fund, the tax is supposed to fund 9 separate projects, the bulk of which are really dedicated to providing enhanced recreational and entertainment and cultural opportunities for the community. The group behind this really feels like those are opportunities that are really intrinsic to improving the quality of life, to really make an investment in the community where we have not invested public money for well over 20 years, and to really help continue the progress that the city's enjoyed over the last decade or more.
Great. About how much money is anticipated to raise?
The tax would generate approximately $69 million in Cedar Rapids proper over a 5-year period. Right. The ballot has been set by the county auditor. It has a 5-year duration, clean-cut sunset, to respond to the people that say, how do I know this is going to end at the end of 5 years? It's very distinctly placed in the ballot. The tax would generate throughout Lynn County in total approximately $89 million. And through the state allocation formula, really a significant amount of money that is generated from the sales tax receipts in Cedar Rapids gets reallocated out into the unincorporated areas of the county, as well as cities like Marion, Hiawatha, Robbins, Lisbon, Mount Vernon. So approximately $18 million actually generated in the city. Not quite $14 million would stay in the city.
I see. And Jeff, in Iowa City, Johnson County, what's the proposed talk at this point?
Well, the city council hasn't decided for sure what to do. I mean, the scheme now is to put a local option sales tax on the ballot, not in the general election, but in the spring. I'm glad to hear the one in Cedar Rapids will end. I think the Iowa City one will be open-ended. It will bring in, I believe, about $5 million a year to the city. Now, I don't know what the total figures are for the other communities.
Sure. It's about 8 to 9 million total.
Total, right, yeah, which is serious money. It's being portrayed by the city as a sales tax for the library, but that, I think, is a real misrepresentation.
I see.
About 40% of the city's money will go for downtown capital improvements. That includes a number of things, including a parking garage, a multi-purpose center, which will include a library in it. So it's a 40% dedicated to downtown capital improvements. Another 10% will go to increased operating costs as a result of these capital improvements. And then the other half of it will go largely for shifting taxes around, that is, paying for things out of the sales tax that we would otherwise pay some other way. 20% of it is to go to water rate relief, but of course that's just, instead of paying your water rates, you'll be paying your sales tax, so it's really no net gain for the city taxpayer. And then there's 10% for human services, which will be some increase in human service spending, 10% for public transit, which is no increase. It'll simply be a shift from sales tax to public transit. There will be no improvements in public transit. And then there's another 10% for unspecified public safety purposes. So it's kind of a Christmas tree of things.
So right now in Iowa, there's approximately almost 500 communities that have this local option sales tax, about 38 counties in unincorporated areas. Why? This seems pretty popular.
Right.
Why do you think this tax is so popular, Gary?
Well, I don't know if you can define it as popular. It's certainly prevalent in a lot of communities. I think that if you look across the state, you know, I'm no economist, but I think the communities that have put the local option sales tax in place have faced eroding property tax value base. It was a methodology of generating some revenues for badly needed public improvements in those communities. You know, boards of supervisors and city councils face tremendous resistance anytime they try to do anything with property taxes, and so I think really it was born out of necessity when there weren't resources to handle it through property taxes. You know, as you look at the growth and what's gone on in the economy at large, I mean, the jobs and the companies that are locating here and prospering are not companies that have high capital investments that generate huge dollars for property taxes. It's not like the, quote, good old days when you had FMC and Harnisch-Fager and Cedar Rapids when property and machinery was taxed as real estate. So there's been shifts around the state in where cities can produce property tax revenues. And I think, you know, certainly in Cedar Rapids, one of the attractive features about the tax to us is that according to Iowa State University studies and studies from the Department of Revenue, about 50% of the sales tax revenues will be paid by people that live outside the Cedar Rapids area.
That's us. Right.
And but you know, it's, you know, we have a large trade territory. The people that come to Cedar Rapids to use the services, use the streets, use the ballpark, use those kinds of facilities, really don't pay any of the cost that goes with maintaining the infrastructure that makes up those facilities. And so that was really an appealing aspect of this to us, is to build some projects that really are appealing to people from all around eastern Iowa and help have the cost shared among those that use it.
Right. Jeff, you're a skeptic about this tax, and it's been said that this is a regressive tax. What does that exactly mean?
Well, I think you need to look at the overall political context of the sales tax. I mean, it is not merely a response to pressure on the property tax base, because until the mid-1980s, this would have been illegal. I mean, a sales tax was a decision made by the state legislature, and it was, since Terry Branstad was elected governor in 1982, and the same year the Democrats took over control of the legislature, the Democratic leadership in the state, legislative leadership, and the Republican governor have cooperated in a major restructuring of our taxes. And that's why we're dealing with local option sales taxes right now. What has happened is first the state sales tax went from 3 to 4%, then from 4 to 5%, and then with the local option tax from 5 to 6%. So there's been a 100% increase in the most regressive of the three major taxes. At the same time, in the 90s, the Republicans and the Democratic leadership have cooperated in cutting the state income tax, eliminating the inheritance tax, and also in both the 80s and 90s giving a lot of tax breaks to industry, which cost a lot of money. And so what's happened has been a shift in taxation away from the income tax, which is the fairest tax, onto the most regressive tax, in which we have a 100% increase we're facing a 100% increase in the most regressive and the most unfair of our taxes in both Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. And of course, if we go to Cedar Rapids, we'll pay it, but if he comes down to the new mall in Iowa City, he'll pay it too. So I don't know if there's any net gain in terms of who gets taxed, but we'll maybe rural people will get hit. But,
Maybe this would be a good time to see our graphic. We do have a graphic that depicts kind of the regressive nature of this based on your income, and basically depending on your income, what you're seeing on is basically looking at the red. That's a 1995 chart of state and local taxes. Looking at the red, lowest income folks are on the left, and they pay about 6% of their income in sales taxes, and it goes down to the folks making the most money pay about 1.2% of their income. That'd be for somebody making $228,000 or more. And on the far left, that would be for somebody making $28,000 or less, which are plenty of folks. And then somewhere in between. So the less you make, the more of your income is subject to these kinds of taxes. We have our graphics department has generated another fine graphic here that depicts 3 income levels, low, medium, and high. And for folks that for 75% of those low-income folks, 75% of their income is spent on things that are subject to sales tax. Middle-income folks, about 50% of their income is spent on things subject to sales tax. And for high-income folks, about 17% of their income is spent on things subject to sales tax. So when you add a penny or a couple pennies, it has a fairly significant effect, and people at the lower end seem to pay a greater percent. And I guess, do you want to,
well,
Gary,
yeah,
because
that's something we've heard a lot
right.
in our campaign, and I think there are 2 or 3 issues that need to be kept in mind. At least with regard to the Cedar Rapids projects, those are primarily public improvement projects that will be available to the community at large. When you're talking about putting $5.5 million of improvements into the city parks, you're putting $3 million into expanded walking and hiking trails, you're talking about $15 million for a public recreational complex, talking about $8 million for a baseball park where the admission at the highest end of the ticket is $5. These are projects that are by and large available to the public in general. People that are at the lower end of the income scale will have use of these facilities, and quite honestly, the people at the higher end of the income level may not be using those facilities or have an interest in them. So to some degree, you're matching the projects with the users. You know, the other studies show, or other surveys show, that the figure is about $150 to $60 for a family of 4 with an average total income of somewhere around $40,000. Well, you look at the kind of junk we eat or use, if you will, that's less than a pack of cigarettes a week, or about a pack of cigarettes a week. It's less than a can of pop a day, and if you trade off those kinds of things you just spend money on without thinking about, and getting in return facilities that you can go to with your family and your kids and enjoy for little or no cost, in my mind that's an easy trade-off. Sure. And this isn't about a major public policy debate. I mean, the state's already gone through that with the sales tax. What we're trying to do in Cedar Rapids is have an accountable list of projects, have a 5-person commission appointed to see that the dollars get spent where the voters said they were supposed to be spent. And when 5 years is over, the projects are built, they're paid for, and people are able to enjoy them.
Sure. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. We're at Midpoint. We've got a web page. We encourage you to take a look at it. If you have ideas for guests or content for our show, send us some email. We'll give you that address here in a second. We appreciate you tuning in. We're talking about the local option sales tax this evening. We're having kind of a little debate about it, the pros and cons of this tax. With us are Gary Streit, he's the co-chair of Greater Opportunities for Cedar Rapids, and Jeff Cox from Iowa City. He's a history professor at the University of Iowa and somebody that's followed this issue for some time. Back to our topic. Jeff, are there fair, the regressivity, how should we be funding basic governmental services, including things like recreation? I mean, there's a great demand for these facilities in Cedar Rapids. How should local governments be generating this money? I can tell you, being on the board of supervisors here in Johnson County, we don't have the resources to do things that voters want us to do. Well,
a government is never going to have the resources to meet the demand for public services. And you just have to make decisions on when you're faced with these choices. But I think there's a lot of people are really in denial about the sales tax and how it works. I mean, of the major taxes that are available to us, every study that's ever been done of the sales tax shows that it is the most unfair tax. And one of the reasons people miss it is because it's a kind of silent thief. You know, it picks your pocket, it nickels and dimes you a little bit at a time, and you don't know that the money's gone. But there's no doubt that the sales tax falls most heavily on young working families, wage-earning families with 2 wage earners with kids. And in some ways, it's a tax that's targeted to children. Because think of the things you buy when you have children. All children's clothes are taxed, all school supplies are taxed, disposable diapers are taxed, and huge amounts of food are taxed. People say, well, food is exempt. Food is not exempt. You know, bulk food you buy at the supermarket is exempt, but look at your supermarket basket and see the things in it that are taxed. Pop is taxed, water is taxed, bottled water is taxed, the water that comes out of your tap is taxed. Everything you need to furnish a home is taxed. Everything you need to cook the food that you buy at the supermarket is taxed. Fast food is taxed. If you go to the Burger King, which a lot of working families do because they're pressed, that's taxed too. And people say, well, it's only $150 a family, but it's more for certain families than for others. It's more for young, working, wage-earning families with kids than it is for people who have investment income and can save some or who are more prosperous. And it is simply an unfair tax, and it should only be used when there is absolutely no alternative. That is, when there's simply no alternative, and when the projects that need to be done we can't do without. Those are, I think, the only circumstances, and I don't know about Cedar Rapids, but I think in Iowa City we're a long way from reaching that point.
So Gary, go ahead.
Well, but Jeff, the point, I mean, the $150 to $160 year figure is based on a family of 4, so it is a family that certainly of modest income that presumably would have younger children in it. And you know, the point is at least what we're doing is we're delivering something to that audience in return. We're delivering community facilities. And I mean, the heart and soul of a community is more than just sewer and streets. It's parks, it's recreational opportunities where people can go to relax and round out this entire picture of the quality of life of why people live where they live there. I mean, as we in our communities try to attract young, energetic people to our communities, and this isn't just a workforce development issue or a job recruitment issue, it's our future. I mean, if we don't continue to have an influx of young people, we're going to have fewer and fewer people paying more and more tax because we didn't do what it takes to do today to make ourselves competitive.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, where growth is happening in the state of Iowa is principally in our urban areas, and we need to make them nice places to live. And actually, it's really great to see these projects developing in Cedar Rapids.
Well, let me make another point about this, though. I mean, one of the reasons that places that are growing don't have the tax base they need is because they've made the decision not to charge taxes to new developments. I mean, we have, with tax increment financing and with economic development schemes and with property tax abatements, which we have used in Iowa City, you know, several $100,000 a year are given in property tax abatements in Iowa City. And we now have a new mall, one of the biggest malls in the whole region, going up in Carlville, and yet Johnson County is not going to get a penny of new property tax revenue to pay for the services they need because the money is being kept by the mall. I mean, and so there decisions have been made by civic leaders to give money to corporate interest, which erode the property tax base, and you could stop doing that. I mean, that is another alternative to the sales tax, is to stop giving away money to companies that don't need it and to stop eroding our tax base in that way.
But, you know, the problem with that argument, and I can't talk to Johnson County, but in Lynn County, number one, the use of TIF financing, certainly in Cedar Rapids, has been minimal. Now, Hiawatha and some of the outlying areas have done more TIF financing, but certainly not in Cedar Rapids. The only real tax incentives that you see in Cedar Rapids are for property tax abatements that have a sunset of 4 to 5 years. And if you look at, the total dollars out of the $46 million that are generated on property tax receipts in Cedar Rapids, I mean, you can't have more than a few percentage difference in terms of where the property taxes are, and Jeff ignores the fact that these do come back on the property tax rolls after the abatement period ends. It's not an open-ended time frame. And so, I mean, I think that the amount of money that any municipality in the state spends on economic development compared to any other state in the country is very, very small. I mean, the only real trump card we play is job training through the community college system, which is a great asset. But it's not some big tax giveaway.
Right. One of the things that has affected cities and counties over the last few years was the elimination of machinery equipment
Sure.
tax, which was a
Cost us $500,000 to $600,000 a year alone.
Right.
And once again, that is not an erosion of the tax base. It's a decision by the legislature to
Right.
subsidize
Right.
shareholders of the companies. I mean,
Right.
it's, you know, and then you have to come back around and tax the workers who work in those companies in order to make up the difference. So this is not some.
But Jeff, shareholders are people. Shareholders are people that are family-owned businesses, and Iowa City is much like Cedar Rapids. The vast majority of the property tax assets, if you will, are in the hands of small, closely held businesses, people that go to their churches, support their schools, support the United Way in their community. And so, and these are people that hire young people to work there too. And you know, I can understand a little bit of what Jeff's saying in the sense that you take that piece out of the equation and you don't replace it with,
Right.
I mean, I guess in Jeff's mind, then we should maybe have income taxes in the municipality or county
So
tax
local,
structure. Now
like
we
a
sort of
local
do,
option
we do
income.
with the
Sure.
with the school taxes. I mean, the surtax
Right.
that people pay to
Well,
support
you know,
their
the state
schools.
legislature, no one in the state legislature will introduce a local option income tax. None of the Democrats who say they're for progressive taxes will introduce a local option income tax. They introduce instead a local option sales tax. If we had a choice, you know, I would be out there fighting just as I did for the enrichment tax for the schools in the late 80s. If we were given the choice by the state legislature of a local option income tax, I would, depending on how it was set up and what it was for, I would be glad to support it. But this again is a political decision. This is not some act of God about natural erosion of the tax base. These are political decisions that have been made by our political leaders that, and we're now being asked to sort of finish the job for them. Make sure that the sales tax increase is 100%, right? That it goes from 3% to 6% over the last 15 years. And I think it's just time to say no to this. We at least have the luxury of having a referendum on this, so we can vote directly ourselves.
So are we ready for like revenue sharing, state revenue sharing on income tax? I mean, we have a surplus now. Is there a way for state, you know, I look at local option income and it'd be a mess to try and collect it. I mean, you'd spend, is there a,
Oh, no,
is there
it's, no, it's easy. I mean,
The enrichment tax is
it's already,
easy.
it's already being done. I mean, like,
Right.
for example, when
It's
Cedar
easy.
Rapids did its enrichment tax, the first time the levy failed because it's all property tax based. So the second time, the people like me who helped support it, we did half property taxes, half of it through the state surtax part of the income tax structure. So it's doable, but for that limited purpose.
Right.
And you know, I think as long as we have a legislature that really doesn't seem to be in balance with where our population centers are, revenue sharing by the state would be the boondoggle of the century, I think.
that was a diplomatic way to say the state legislature doesn't pay any attention to urban areas. Final comment on the local option income
Well, I
tax.
think a local option
Either.
sales tax.
Yeah,
I mean,
either.
I think
We're getting out
if
of
it
the-
were a last resort for a library, I would support it. But we can afford to build a new library in Iowa City without a local option sales tax.
Gary, final comment?
I just think that we, through our efforts, have given the people of Cedar Rapids an opportunity to really make a distinctive statement about where the city's headed. We really have a lot of excitement for what this can do for the young people and the older people and everybody that lives there. And you know, we've got a lot of work to do till June 23rd, but we're going to keep at it.
All right, I appreciate both of you being
Thank
with
you.
us. We're at that point on the program where we come to the People's Podium, and that is the time when we give somebody an opportunity to talk to us about a special issue. Tonight with us is Jessica Olson, and Jessica is the director of the Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline, a new statewide hotline, and she wants to tell you about it. Jessica.
Thank you. The Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline is Iowa's first statewide hotline for survivors of sexual abuse, their friends and family, and people concerned about the effects of sexual violence. The Sexual Abuse Hotline is a place for callers to find a supportive listener and receive referral information. The Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline was made possible through a grant from the Iowa Department of Justice Crime Victim Assistance Division. The hotline is housed at the Rape Victim Advocacy Program in Iowa City. The Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline became operational on April 1st of this past year. Staff members will answer calls during business hours, and on evenings and weekends, staff members and trained volunteers will answer the Sexual Abuse Hotline via PCS, which are Personal Communication Systems phones. PCS phones are distinct from traditional cellular phones in the way that the signals are transmitted. PCS phones transmit a digital code over the airwaves rather than a voice transmission, and digital signals cannot be picked up by local scanners, baby monitors, or other cordless phones. Staff members and volunteers answering the Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline will also have access to organized referral information for each county in Iowa and will be able to assist callers in connecting with their local sexual assault center, law enforcement agency, or medical center. Volunteers with the Rape Victim Advocacy Program complete 56 hours of training and are certified victim counselors under the Code of Iowa. Survivors of sexual assault and childhood abuse, family members and friends, and people with a concern about sexual violence can utilize the Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline. The AT&T language line is available for callers who do not speak English, and a TDD, a telecommunications device for the deaf, will be available for individuals with a hearing impairment. The TDD machine can be accessed during business hours, which are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., an Iowa Relay service, a phone interpreting service for persons who are deaf, hearing impaired, or speech impaired, can be used on evenings and weekends. The Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline is a service to provide support, understanding, and resources to women, children, and men in the state of Iowa.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Jessica Olson, the director of the Iowa Sexual Abuse Hotline here in Iowa. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'd like to thank our guest tonight, Gary Streit, who is the co-chair of the Greater Opportunities for Cedar Rapids, and Jeff Cox, a professor of history at the University of Iowa. We've been having a debate about local option sales tax. I'm sure this will be a topic will be kicked around here in eastern Iowa for the coming months.
Sure.
So,
thank you.
Once again, you've been watching Iowa News and Views. We produce a new show every other week. We encourage you to keep joining us. Tell your friends about us. Send us your ideas for future shows and guests for future shows. I'd like to thank our contributors. I'd like to thank our local sponsors around the state that make it possible for you to see this show, and of course our wonderful all-volunteer crew producing this bona fide news interview program. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make it a better place to live. Get out there and get busy. Thanks.